Hello, and welcome to the Student Ministry Conversations podcast with your hosts, Brent Aiken, David Pruitt, and Russell Martin. This podcast is all about equipping, encouraging, and inspiring youth pastors weekly with topics that are brought to the table by youth pastors from all over the world. Hey guys, welcome to the live 100th episode of Student Ministry Conversations. We totally didn't just mess up and do a test broadcast and start for like 6 minutes without realizing that we weren't live, but it's cool because mistakes happen, and this is why we don't do live, just so y'all know. But with that being said, we want to thank all of you for joining. We want to thank all of you for listening, and we're just going to kind of hit it from the top. Russell, man, once again, what a opportunity this has been. I cannot believe that it's been 100 episodes. You and me started this. Why don't you say your thoughts again?
Take two. It's been great. Like I said on some episodes, I had a podcast I did kind of before the pandemic, and when I was at my previous church, and then moved down here, and kind of got talking with Brent over. We were actually hung out on the Clubhouse app for a while, and we were playing with that a little bit, and we thought about, hey, how can we do a podcast? And the idea was, how do we capture the conversations between youth leaders and make them available for people, especially those who are first time or bivocational, or who can't go to youth specialties and can't go to grow curriculum and all those things. So that was kind of the original idea, was capturing those conversations. And we've done that, and we've started off with 20 episodes. That was my goal, and now we're into episode 100. So it's been crazy, and I think everybody here who's been on there, and everybody who's watching who's been on here as well.
Yeah, and we have to stop and also say thank you to David for coming in and stepping on the show. He's been with us as a host for a couple months now and done his first slew of episodes. But man, he came in clutch, kind of took a little bit off of our plates to where it's not every week or every other week. Now it's every 3 weeks that we have a episode, which allows a little bit better opportunity to kind of handle the load of what it takes to put this show on. But it also makes sure that we are not leaving you high and dry and missing weeks of content, which is our main priority with this. So we are super, super excited that all of y'all are joining us today. And then we're going to just get right to it. One thing I need to say before we get started with our two guests today, Jerry and Cody have both been on the show, but not only that, they do hold something else in common. They are two of our guests that have been featured on the show twice. And so we are going to be talking through their last episodes on the show here in just a second. But if you are watching this on Facebook right now, we have been announcing that we're going to be doing some giveaways. And those giveaways are going to be later in the show. But if you have not signed up for those giveaways, then you can go to the link that I just posted in the chat. And you can get signed up for those giveaways. The first ones are going to be immediately after we get done with Cody and Jerry. And we have some pretty awesome stuff. We've had some different books that we're going to be giving away. Shane Pruitt, Calling Out the Called. Another book by Shane Pruitt, 9 Common Lies Christians Believe. And then from Katie Edwards, we're going to be giving away Disciple Making with Girls from the Youth Cartel. And then also we are going to be doing Brock Morgan's new book, which we actually did an episode over this book called The Anxious Teen, and talking about anxiety in our culture today and how to deal with it. We have other prizes as well. I believe, Russell, you have 2, correct?
I have one that I got sent, okay, which is the Cards Christians Like.
Yeah, so we also have a copy of Cards Christians Like to give away. And then I think personally, at least in my mind, the coolest gift that we have to give away is we have a copy of Sustainable Youth Ministry from Mark DeVries. And not only that, I believe that he told me he was going to sign it himself before he sends it off. And so if you've been in youth ministry for a while, you might have heard of that book, or heard of what Mark DeVries has done for the state of youth ministry for the past 20, 30 years. Has been remarkable. And so we're super excited to have that as an opportunity as well. But get on that link and go check out that. But we are going to move into conversations. As I said, we're going to be we're going to be looking at the last two conversations that both of these gentlemen that with us have done. And we're going to start with Cody. And so Cody spent some time with me a couple episodes ago talking about discipleship. And so we're going to kind of dive deep on that for just a little bit. Cody, why don't you give us a brief description again, what you meant and what you were talking about with discipleship and how that plays into our conversation today?
Yeah, so our conversation last time, it kind of started with the idea of discipleship being a relationship-based ministry where we help each other and to become imitators of God. And then through that, I think it kind of went into how worship is really one of the first steps to discipleship, that we lift our eyes on who God is, and see his otherness and his holiness, his grace, his love. And so we really spend time looking at who God is, and then we pray for the power of God's Holy Spirit to transform us into the likeness of Christ in our life. And then I did want to point out, you had a very powerful quote in that, and you said, if we can get our students to stop even for 1 minute and to think about something other than themselves, if they can lift their eyes on God, and then even I think in service, if they can think of their brothers and sisters in Christ, I think that that's a big win in helping people take one step towards discipleship. And then kind of finish the episode on how I'm a track coach and how track and field and the physical training we do is a integral part of our discipleship, our own spiritual formation. And so that's kind of a good summary of that.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Thank you. And the thing is like with that comment, that does so much more than just disciple making. Obviously, it points them to Jesus, but there's so many studies that have come out that have shown like all of these self-focused illnesses, all of these self-focused mindsets like anxiety and mental health issues and stuff like that, most of them will go away or get significantly less if they just take their eyes off themselves. And so not only does it bring us closer to Christ when we draw people in, when we have an opportunity to serve, and it allows them to take their eyes off of it, but off of themselves, but it also gives them an opportunity to take their eyes off their problems too. And I think that's a pretty significant feature of service, and one that really, really needs to be drawn out more and more. Guys, what do y'all think? Open for comments on the floor.
Disciple making is the one thing that Jesus left for us to do, and it's just so easy to get distracted from that. When I think of this may be a real downer statement, but when I think of disciple making, I think of the devil. I think of and the fact that even in Genesis, it was said that the serpent was the most crafty, cunning creature that God created. So he knows exactly what he's doing. And when we are called to make disciples, and that is literally our one job, the one thing God told us to do, Jesus told us to do before he left, to be seated in heaven, Satan is working relentlessly against that to distract us and to pull us away from it. So very powerful. Just every once in a while, just to ask the point blank question, is what I'm doing in ministry actually making disciples? And that's, a simplistic a question as that is, I found in my own ministry that is severely recalibrating question as well.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree with that. The more, I mean, realistically, what are we doing at the end of the day if we're not focused on disciple making? We can have all the activities, all the games, all the big events. We can do everything evangelism wise that we can. But I think we also, at least it might have not been in Cody's specific episode, but we've also talked about on this show about like we have a really, really significant focus on evangelism sometimes, and then we just drop them at the door of discipleship and leave them. And I think that's honestly, it's something that just as detrimental to them as the student going forward. It's detrimental to us too, because we kind of lose our ability to influence that kid when we're just like, hey, you know, we got you here, have fun. Because that's not what Jesus commands us to do at all. And so I guess to go in a little bit farther, but Cody, excuse me, is how do we, outside of service, what would be another way that we can allow that disciple making, even 1 minute thought process, to shift off of their own attention onto the attention of others, or onto the issues, or onto the other aspects of other people, and taking them from that selfish gaze to a selfless gaze? How does that, I guess, how do you get that more in discipleship?
Well, first I have to, man, I have never thought about discipleship. You know, discipleship is not a great word, but kind of the negative formation side of discipleship that Jerry was just talking about. And man, that really has struck with me. It's like, man, you can kind of look at what culture in the world is doing to our youth right now. And y'all are all in youth ministry, and I'm in coaching. And so you see very, very strong things that the culture in the world are trying to form into our students. And part of that is it's resulting in mental illness. Is one of the things that I know that a lot of people are encountering. And so I have completely left your question, Brent, because I'm really thinking through that. And you know,
You're good, man.
The other piece of that is just kind of stopping in, again, what Jerry said is, you know, that's such a recentering question to really, really stop and say, is what I'm doing actually discipling anybody? Or are we just doing things because this is what we've done, and it's kind of the routine? And so maybe that's where my mind's going at this point is, you know, this is kind of what I was reflecting on anyway, is how do we, I'm going to ask a question to y'all. How do we become extremely intentional with all the little pieces of what we do? Or does that amount of extreme intention, is that almost impossible? Or should we really try to be way more intentional, communicating some of the bigger ideas that we're trying to get across in the midst of a worship service, instead of like, all right, we sing these songs, here's a little message, go to your small groups? Should we provide more space for really being intentional? And would that type of intention help total discipleship?
I think it absolutely does. And I think it's essential to what we do. I think so many times we put all of the focus on specific statistics, like, you know, this is our number. And really that's what it comes down to, is what is our number, so to speak? Like, you know, how many people are, number one, showing up to the events and to church and worship? How many people came forward and accepted Christ? How many people, you know, and it seems like our entire strategy tends to be focused on how many did we have last week and how many do we have this week. And I think when we put all of our focus on numbers and statistics in that sense, I think we can kind of miss the mark of what is God doing in the lives of these students. You know, we kind of touch on that for like a second, but the first thing that we tend to post, and I see so many people post on, like, man, we had 50 people show up to youth last night, how awesome. Or we had 100 people show up, and that's something absolutely worth celebrating. You know, all the time and hard work and everything that we put in, and more importantly, when our students are inviting their friends, and how vulnerable that can be, to step up and see their friends actually coming, is huge. And so it definitely needs to be celebrated, but maybe we need to shift our focus off of the statistics as much as we do, and actually ask ourselves, what's it's kind of that old school John Wesley, like, how is it with your soul kind of thing. And I think as we shift our focus onto that, then we can actually get to the root of your question, Cody, is how do we disciple, and is that obtainable?
I think it comes down to tracking. And that is a very, very blanket statement, because I mean, how do you track an entire church or an entire student ministry? But I think Kenny and Al Campbell from Grow have really, really kind of ironed out at least a disciple making process in my mind that works really, really well. And we have kind of adapted it and modeled it into our program. And how we do that is we really, really tell our adult leaders and our volunteers is like, we win when a student takes their next step in their relationship with Jesus, because that is a practical way of measuring the effectiveness of disciple making. Because we can't say we win when a student comes to Christ. Of course we do. But at the same time, what about the 50% of our students that literally grew up in our church and have already accepted Jesus and they're still there? And so what does that look like? How do we work to measure that in a way that allows us to have more than just a like blanket of like, hey, we win when they accept Jesus, when they get baptized, and when they serve in another aspect of the church? Those are great. But what happens when we have a kid that's done all those? Do we just stop? Or what happens to the kid that is like earlier than salvation, that is just now coming to like realize that Jesus is a person? Like where is the measurement? How can we work to address those different things? And so I think one of the biggest things is just allowing there to be a measurable statistic that we can hit for every single person. And whether it's a church of 2,000 people or a student ministry of 5, if we have successful ways of tracking that question, then we can see that work out in a variety of different ways. And so a next step to me might be different than a next step to Cody, and a next step to Cody might be different than a next step to David. But the thing is we can all acknowledge that next step. We can all see where they were and where they are now. Which is how I would address that as far as disciple making goes, is we have to have something that is as fluid as possible when it comes to evaluating the disciple making practices. But ultimately, as long as we're tracking their road, we get to see all the steps of their disciple making process. But this is going to be really, really difficult, because obviously we could spend another 40 minutes on that conversation with Cody on disciple making. And who knows, there might be a disciple making or discipleship part 2 podcast down the road, where we do a panel discussion instead of a just one-on-one discussion, because I think that would be really, really important. But for the sake of time and for the sake of us respecting the people that are listening to this live, we do want to move on with our show and move on to calendar boundaries with Jerry. So Jerry, in a nutshell, tell us what you were talking about. I do want to point out one quote before you get started that just absolutely rocked my world when you said it. And it was, your calendar should act like a mirror as much as a roadmap. And man, what an insightful quote from that episode, because I think a lot of times we see calendar as like this plan of events that we're doing, but we never really look at it from an introspective angle of like, man, how busy am I making myself? Or how unavailable am I making myself? So a little bit more description and detail on what we discussed. Other than that, obviously that was a huge takeaway, but man, that absolutely rocked me when you said that during our episode.
Yeah, I think for a long time, the badge of honor has been busyness. And someone asks you how you're doing, and you can reply, oh, I'm just so busy. That seems to be like successful. That's what the equation is. Like, if I can stay busy, or if I have so many demands on me from other people that I'm constantly going, then somehow I'm really doing it right. I'm really doing it well. And I hope what came across in that episode was that is not a healthy long-term approach to ministry. And it certainly isn't biblical. And it certainly isn't the way that Jesus handled ministry. So I hope what came across, the difference between the roadmap and the mirror, I hope what came across in that is just the ability to look at your actual literal calendar and say, is this the kind of person that I want to be? Now, I know that there are demands, and I know that there are expectations. There are parents that need things, or students that need things. There's our senior leadership, executive pastor, other people, other pastors, or other people in the church that make demands, not to mention our own family and children and spouses and all that stuff. But I really do think that you have to look at your calendar and say, is this the kind of person I want to be? Is this what I want my life to be about? And I think I shared in that episode a little bit about my own backstory, that I was raised in the pastor's house, and my dad was a real kind of a go-getter, like Energizer Bunny kind of pastor. It was a really small church, and so I kind of think of, in the Mary Poppins movie, Dick Van Dyke with the one-man band thing. So he was doing it all. And so that was, I grew up in the shadow of that. And so born into me was this idea that successful ministry is nonstop ministry, like go, 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 go. Once you stop, then you're not doing something right. So that was kind of my upbringing. And I had to learn a lot of that the hard way. I had to learn that's not effective. It's not healthy. It's not reflective in scripture or anything like that. So that's kind of where my episode was.
That's awesome. Anybody have comments or questions to go with that?
Well, one of the things I thought about with that episode, and both of y'all's, is we talk about intentionality. And Jerry's talking about making your calendar intentional. And we were just talking about intentionality with discipleship. And so, I believe it was Jerry. I listened to both of them back to back, and so I get some of them confused. But looking at your priorities and your calendar and saying, I think I'm just going to throw these out there. It was from one of your two. But there's so many opportunities, there's so many things. But what fits into your plan, and how does that help make your calendar, and how do you find balance in your calendar between events and it can't just be, oh, well, we should do this week. It's being intentional. So maybe can you talk out a little bit more about like helping somebody to sit at the beginning of the semester or the week or the semester or the year and be more intentional? What are some of the things you look at? I mean, you go in more depth in your episode, but maybe that would be a place to add some thoughts.
Yeah. The first question, whether it comes from my brain or I've had students come and say, yeah, I think we should do this or that. My first question is why? What's the purpose of what do we hope to accomplish through doing that? And I think as a ministry, and you got to choose that as your own local ministry or organization or church, you have to decide what are the things that we're hoping to accomplish. And I would suggest that you distill that down to as few words as possible, just so that you can kind of keep it more focused. But for us, if it doesn't accomplish one of four purposes, then we don't do that. So it's not we don't do anything. Oh, I just think that would be really fun. Well, yeah, sure, it would be really fun, but you can feel free to do that like with your friends on the weekend, or whatever the case. Now, if we can make it fit one of our purposes, then I'd be more open to it. The second question, and this is not like, oh, look at me, or it's strictly logistical. I will literally show them the calendar that we have planned out and say, okay, where would we put that with the boundaries, the healthy boundaries that are in place? Where would we place that? Like just this past week, we talked about doing a Busch Gardens trip this summer to an amusement park. Last time we did it, we went to another King's Dominion. Now we want to go to Busch Gardens. And I literally looked at our summer calendar, and it's not that there's something every weekend, but I want to keep there from being something every weekend. So I literally had to say, okay, well, where would we put that? There is literally one Saturday of all 3 months of summer where we could actually maybe do that. And that's even just a little bit sketchy. So the first question is, why are we doing it? The second question is, where would we do that within the boundaries of like healthy living? Because we're not trying, it's not just about me as a youth pastor. I'm trying to like protect my youth leaders. I have kids repeatedly, constantly coming up to me, Jerry, we want to do a lock-in. Jerry, we want to do a lock-in. We're going to do an overnighter. And I'm just like, oh man, it's not a personal thing. Okay, like I can pull that off, right? But I have an army of volunteers that also have a full-time job and an overnight event is going to wreck them for the rest of their, work week. And that's not something that we can do. So, hey, if you want to do an overnighter, have some friends over to your house and you can stay up all night and do the things that you want to do. But I have to not just think about me as a pastor, but I also have to think about like the leaders that I'm leading as well. I want them to be sane. I don't want them to be burned out as well. So those are a couple of the questions that I personally ask when people come to me and they're like, hey, we should do this, we should do that. Because a lot of times youth pastors, I think, especially, are really known for, we want to talk about like our purposes and our mission and our successes and what drives us. But we don't as often ask questions like, okay, where is my rest? Where am I going to just stop and not do anything? Where am I cultivating peace in my own life? Where can I breathe? Where am I building in leeway in my weekly schedule? I think, and I may have even said this in the original episode, honor the Sabbath is one of our most easily dismissed commandments. Just because, it's 2023, so, it's not really relevant, or it doesn't, but man, God built that in. The God of the universe didn't need any rest, and yet he took a day to rest, when he was done creating. And it wasn't because he needed it, it's because he knows we need it. And you got to build that into your schedule. So there really needs to be a solid cadence of rest and peace and Sabbath for all of us. So yeah, this is a soapbox for me, so I could go on all day.
Well, I did want to bring up a question. I'm looking in our live chat, and Mark, who was also a guest with us, said, for someone who is busy sick, how do they move from that to a place of rest without guilt? And this is not specifically for Jerry, it could be for anybody, but as I saw a couple of questions, I wanted to bring them into our chat. So how do you go, if you are super busy and then you go to, hey, I'm setting these boundaries, how do you deal with that? And I would think it would be your guilt and also answering other people's expectations of, hey, you used to do this. And I think this goes, Jerry, to something Brent brought up in your episode when he said, if you are a young pastor and you have all the time in the world and you're not married, you don't have a family, there is that, saying that. So can you speak into that just a little bit? Anybody?
I definitely would just kind of, the way that I see time is kind of the way that I see budgeting and finances.
Mm-hmm.
If you live life with no finances, with all the finances and no budget, eventually you're going to get to a point to where that finance runs short, or that finance gets to some kind of retaining wall that you're like, oh no, like I'm in trouble now. And so if you don't have those budgets in place, if you don't have that standardized measurement where you can come in and be like, hey, I really like, I want to make sure that I have at least 3 nights a week that I am home with my family. At least 3 nights a week. And so that is minimum. That doesn't mean that you plan your calendar to have every night busy other than 3 nights a week. That means that you have at least 3 nights a week or 2 nights a week or whatever works for your schedule, but allowing those budget moments to fit in. And the thing is just like with finances, if you are literally going into debt because you're spending too much money and you go to a financial advisor for help, the first thing they're going to do is say, let me see your statements. Let me see where you've been spending money, and we're going to fine tooth comb this thing. I listened to Dave Ramsey's thing the other day, and like someone basically came in and said that they were $1 million in debt. And it shocked him. And he was like, you don't want my help? He was like, because I'm about to put you on a $30,000 a year budget for the next 3 years, where the only inside of a restaurant you're going to see is your second job when you pick one up. And it's just this mindset of like, we get so lackadaisical with the time management skills that we have that we kind of just allow anything and everything to sit. But if you're in that phase, the first thing you need to do is you need to get that fine tooth comb, and you need to go through everything that you're doing. And that fine tooth comb is basically what Jerry just said. Does it fit the 4 things that hold true in my ministry and my family and everything else? Is it time that I need to be present? Is it time that I'm like, is it time worth away from my family? Is it something that is beneficial to the disciple making ministry that I'm doing? Or is it just fluff? And then you got to learn how to say no. There are so many different things that you can just say no to. And it might make someone mad, but at the end of the day, you're working for your sanity. Like Jerry said, for the people that work under you's sanity. And then you're also working towards the sanity of your family, whether it's now or future. So if you don't have those budgeting guidelines set up now, you're not going to have them later.
Well, and another thing that I really got out of the episode is Jerry had mentioned the importance of considering your emotional and mental state going into the situation. So like, if somebody asks you to do something and you're falling apart for whatever reason, how difficult that's going to be. You're almost setting yourself up for failure. Jerry, if you don't mind talking more into that, because I know for me personally, that is my kryptonite. Saying no in general is hard for me, but I know like yesterday was a really tough day for me emotionally and mentally, and there's so many things that I found myself like almost like on the verge of just losing it. And so like the smallest requests got to me, and I was like, and I think a lot of us are living in that place for more than just a couple of days a week.
Yeah, knowing yourself. If you know me, you know I'm not like a big self-care guy. That term just kind of, it makes me cringe a little bit. But I think you have to know yourself, and you have to know where your feet are in regards to the edge, and wherever that that may be. And internally, and there are indicators for me. I get easily irritated. That's the number one thing. Like when I know I'm getting toward like burnout, it doesn't take much to get under my skin and for me to get annoyed with just the slightest little thing. So I know that's one indicator. So you have to know yourself. So when someone comes to you with a request, you have to already know. You might be 50 yards from the edge and you're golden and you're good, and they come to you and you're like, yeah, I got margin, I can do that, or I can shuffle things around and I can make that work. But on the other hand, you also have to know when someone comes to you, and you got to know where you are just in that kind of emotional and mental. And I have found that that's directly connected with my spiritual walk as well. Like how close I am to Christ really is correlating with like how fragile or non-fragile I feel on the emotional and mental level. So that's really my first stop when I start to feel short-tempered, or I start to feel like I'm being, I don't know, I'm given of myself, and I'm not that we're here to receive things, but you can kind of feel that eggshell, and you're getting close to the edge. I want to run back to Christ and just say, okay, where have I gone awry, or where have I sidestepped, or where have I deprioritized my love relationship with him? Because that's what's kind of gotten me to that point. My lead pastor just yesterday, there's this thing in June that he's been asked to do. He's doing this panel. He wants me to join him. And I literally, even with my lead pastor, and usually I'm kind of a yes guy. Like, hey, if you want me to do that, yeah, sure, I can do that. I really had to just kind of pause and say, at first I gave him a tentative yes. I said, okay, well, let me check with my wife. Let me check with our family calendar. Let me make sure that everything is okay and clear before I give you a yes. And you gotta do that. You can't be ashamed to say, hit pause, time out. Let me get back to you on that, rather than just automatically saying, yeah, I can do this, I can do that. Because I think a lot of people, this was me, a lot of pastors get into the pastorate. Part of the people pleasing is in the DNA, and you want to just, you want to make people happy. You want to, do things for, and it's kind of in your nature, but that's not at the expense of your own well-being, or that you become a doormat for other people. That's not healthy for you. I was at a couple funerals recently, and anyone who's been to a funeral knows that time is currency. And I think you have to ask yourself, how am I spending the most valuable currency that I have? And what is the outcome of that? When you spend your time on something, you want to see return on investment. Now, we know as pastors, that's all spiritual. And so it's really hard to kind of qualify that. And we know that's a lot of seed planting and watering and all that. And that takes time. We understand. But where's my most valuable currency, which is time? Where is it going, and what's kind of the dividend of that, so to speak? Not to unspiritualize it, but that really is keeping an eye on, return on investment type of thinking is important as well. So I hope I'm hitting on what your question is asking.
And I got to put this learning into practice. It's time for me to duck out of here. So thank you so much for having me on. I'm honored. Congratulations on 100 episodes, and y'all have done a great thing. And I know that there's a whole lot more to come. So I've enjoyed this. Thank you very much.
Appreciate it, Cody. All right. Well, with that being said, and as Cody kind of takes off, we are going to move into our first round of giveaways. And we are going to start with the giveaways for the people that have actually registered on the website. And so we also said that if you haven't registered on the website, you can just start just talking in the chat, and we'll include you because you are listening live. And so if you are interested in being in the raffle for some of the books and you have not registered online, please type in the chat and we will get you. It says, am I muted? No? Okay. Okay. So yeah, we'll get you into the chat and we'll go from there. So I believe our first giveaway will be the Calling Out the Called book right here. And like I said, Shane Pruitt was one of my guests back a few episodes ago, and we talked about this book in specifics and talked about how there is literally no farm league when it comes to pastors coming up in our world today. And so this will be the first prize that we're giving out, and that is going to Steve Cullum. And so Steve, message us after the chat, or I'll reach out to you so I can get your address and where to send this book. But congratulations, man. Fantastic book. Shane's a great guy. And this one was really, really good. We are going to go ahead and do, let's see, we'll probably do 2 more right now. And then we will go from there. The next book is going to be Shane's other book. That is the 9 Common Lies That Christians Believe. And that goes to Mark Beasley. What's up, buddy? So Mark, I know where you live, I think, but you can send me your address anyways, and we can get this going to you as well. And then finally, the last one, man, guys, what do y'all think? Which one should I give away?
I'd say the Anxious Teen.
Anxious Teen. Okay, so Anxious Teen will be going out as well. And let's see, make sure that we haven't had anybody else. So we will go with Melissa Stevenson. She's been watching live with us right now. And so she is getting the Anxious Teen. And fantastic book. But yeah, Melissa will be getting a copy of The Anxious Teen. So with that being said, this is the part of the episode that we were a little skeptical on, but hopefully we can have a few people chime in and talk about the episodes and talk about their favorite chat. What's up, buddy?
So they're saying that there's no sound at all on Facebook.
Beautiful.
I just checked the OBS sound.
Is that
it
better?
like one specific person, or is it all of us?
It might have been me. I might have just accidentally did.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
I'm going to turn it up on Facebook to see if I can hear.
You gotta love live.
On Facebook.
You gotta love live.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was you, Brent, because Mark just said we can hear me.
Okay. So for the people that obviously, man, I click a button and everything goes awry. This is why I don't do live, folks. But with that being said, you haven't heard a lot. So I'm going to go back through and say that for everybody that was listening, Steve Cullum, you got a copy of Calling Out the Called. So shoot me a message later, or I will find you on Facebook and we can get your address to send you that. Mark Beasley won the 9 Common Lies That Christians Believe book, which we will get to you as well. And then Melissa Stevenson won The Anxious Teen, which was Brock Morgan's book, which has also been a guest on the show. And so now that you can hear me, we are going to move to what I was saying earlier was the experimental aspect of this episode, I'll just say. And that is, I'm going to literally put the invitation to invite this to join our chat right now live in the Facebook Live comments. And anybody that's listening can chime in and you can share maybe your favorite parts about the show, maybe topics you'd want to be brought onto the show later, or favorite episode, anything like that. But we'd love to hear from you. And so I will post that right now. And we will take a second and just kind of shoot the breeze while y'all have a second to join us on Zoom. And we would love to hear from anybody and everybody that's listening. If you don't want to be live, we'll totally read your chat comments as well. So you can tell us what your favorite episode was, or if you want to just come on, however that works. But yeah, we'd love to have y'all in the conversation. So I do have to ask, I mean, for you 100 episodes, if you've listened to one outside of obviously your own, because that's not fair, what is your favorite episode that you've listened to so far on the podcast?
This may not be as believable because he's happens to be one of the 4, but my favorite episode so far has been the calendaring one.
Oh yeah,
that's definitely a big struggle for me. And especially as someone who does youth and worship full time, as well as design, it can get dicey very fast. And so that's part of why I wanted to ask that question. I was really stoked when Brent said that Jerry was going to be on, because I was like, oh my gosh, I want to know so much more about the mental emotional state of that. As somebody who has dealt with depression all my life. So yeah, I just love the insight and just the way that you articulate certain principles. I think is really cool too. So I don't know. I'm probably like a lifelong fan now.
yeah, that's awesome. I loved Jerry's episode. That was a great one. What about you, Russell?
I'm going to go back to, so the not ours that we were on, or not ours that we recorded, or just
No,
any of
just
them?
not your personal one. Like if you
Okay.
say building worship teams is your favorite, I'm just going to discount
Well-
you as a liar, and we're going to move on.
Well, but you know, so I really liked, you know, of course we were the ones kind of starting these very first few episodes. I liked Melissa's Cultivating Worship, and it was one of our leading podcasts for a long time. So we kind of both kind of had the same kind of idea with some of our thoughts, but just cultivating that worship space, and maybe because it was the second one I ever recorded, or third one I ever recorded. But I encourage people, you know, if you're logging on now, go back, because you know there's probably, if you just watched them in the past year, there's probably 60 or 80 episodes that you haven't, you know, you may not have gone through. So make sure you go back and look. But that was one of those. And like I said, it may just been because it was one of the first, but that was one of my favorites.
That's awesome. Yeah, as far as mine, I have one that honestly didn't gain a lot of traction, but I loved the conversation in it. And it was one of my early ones as well. And it was video games in student ministry, and talking about how we can use video games for an impact for the kingdom. And it talked about like before service playing with kids, or like having like youth servers and stuff like that, to where like you can bring the gospel even into video game environments, or how you can use video games to break the barrier and break down walls before the conversations get started. And we had a guest by the name of Dustin Phillips. He is a children and youth pastor in East Texas, but he also is a professional Twitch streamer. And he has a pretty good Twitch following, to where literally he streams for 4 hours. In the first hour, hour and a half of that, they literally do a Bible devotional reading together, and they talk about different things, and they talk about how talk about the scriptures that they're reading. He opens it up to questions for the Twitch community. And I've chimed into quite a few of his episodes over the last year or two. And it's just really, really cool to see that aspect of ministry. And that's honestly been one of my favorite things with this whole podcast, is I love that we don't pick the topic for our guests. Occasionally we do, when it's like, oh, hey, we want to talk about your book or something to that nature. But there's a lot of times that we'll just be like, hey, you pick the topic. We want to hear what you want to talk about. And I love the fact that we've had 100 episodes, and probably 90 of them have been unique topics, which is absolutely insane to me, that you can actually think of 90 different episodes, 90 different topics that apply to youth ministry. But it's been really, really cool in the process. And I love that about the whole podcast and how this has gone, because it has allowed me to even branch out and open my understanding of what student ministry is, because there are some episodes that I would have never, ever thought about as far as being a topic in youth ministry. I would have always defaulted to disciple making or student leadership or building worship teams or planning events or something to that nature. But then you have others that are just out there that were ideas that were fantastic. Mark Beasley, Mark in the chat said, mine was not my favorite. But he said his favorite was Paul Turner's on organization. He said it was amazing. And so, yeah, I loved Paul Turner's episode. Definitely want you to follow him as well. He's a fellow podcaster. He's been doing it for a lot longer than us. And he does some fantastic work on his podcast as well.
Hey, Brent, I think one of the things you mentioned asking, and we haven't anybody else join, but our possible future topics. So I would love to hear, especially from David and Jerry, what are some of the things that you've encountered? One of the things we're looking at is actually setting up some sort of youth ministry kind of training deal for new youth leaders. And so I'm looking for what podcast we have that go along with that. But what are some of the topics that we haven't covered, David, Jerry, that you would think would be helpful for us to look at finding somebody for?
So I don't, you'll have to forgive me. I have a really bad memory. So I'm just kind of like scrolling through like the episodes. But one thing that's really coming to the surface for me lately is helping people discern a calling or a possible calling into ministry. And what does that look like? And how do you know that you're called into ministry? And then if you feel that calling, what do you do? Now I know like denominationally, there are different processes and stuff. And I'm in the Church of the Nazarene and we have a particular process. So yeah, sure. I might kind of like lean them in that direction, but organically, how do I help that individual? And I know it's percentage wise, it's minute. It's very few people that this affects, but when it does affect you, I like the idea of a youth pastor or youth leader knowing exactly what they're going to do if someone comes to them and says, I feel like God might be calling me into ministry. And so I like to have like a playbook ready to go. I haven't read that Pruitt book, but I recently like Googled some, what are some resources, and that I think what that book was like the number one thing that popped up on the Google search. But I love to create, and I love to, just kind of make things. So I'm actually crafting something like a tool that I want to use in my own ministry to be able to help guide people like that. So that's a topic I think as we see pastors, especially from 2020, just like jumping ship and not being replaced, and we see burnout rates, and we see very low numbers of young people stepping into ministry. How do we really help those who do feel like God is calling them?
Well, and something we're dealing with our denomination is we had all of a sudden a lot of people who were in youth ministry who needed to and did move up to being pastors. And so there's this gap right now of youth leaders. And so we're looking at, that's why we're developing something. Is like, how do we help people to fast track and discern that call and get the skills they need to be able to start doing youth ministry? David, what else, other ones do you have?
Yeah, Jerry touched on a big one for me, is all about calling. We probably spend more time talking about that in our ministry than anything, because I believe that God is calling every single human being to something. And what can that ministry look like for you? And so that's one that we talk a lot about. My last two podcasts have touched on burnout specifically. And I know that that's such a huge thing. I mean, when you look around and see so many people who are walking away from ministry, and not just ministry, but like their churches and church in general. Like, I just had a conversation with some youth pastors that were leaving their position and just said, "Hey, we're done. We don't want to do church anymore. We don't want to do any of it." And it's just like, it's a heartbreaking reality that we're all facing. And so, I'd have to go back and look and see, but maybe another thing that we can touch on is this idea of deconstruction. I don't know if we've already hit on it, but I know it's becoming more and more of a hot topic in the church world. And how do we, what's a healthy way to look at the way that we've been taught, and what are those things that are fundamental and core and need to be there, and are there some things that we maybe need to rethink? And so I think that could definitely be a good topic for us moving forward.
Yeah, no, I think that would be good. And as far as what Jerry said, I mean, Shane Pruitt, his episode is obviously talking about that book. And he brings up a lot of things, but a lot of the other things that he brings up is we have a lot of underqualified youth pastors, because the ones that are good at their jobs are just being poached by other churches instead of building up a system that is bringing more people into the ministry. He said more than anything else, he gets calls and he's like, "Hey, like we need a superstar. We need like someone on their A game," kind of thing like that. And they're not looking for investing and building up a youth pastor. They want to find a youth pastor that's already at the top of his game, and they want to poach that youth pastor. But then the problem with that is then that church becomes youth pastorless, and they do the same thing. And then that next church does the same thing. And it's just this never ending cycle of churches stealing youth pastors. And he's like, we got to get to the point to where, and I think this goes into David's topic too on deconstruction, is we have to start training youth pastors instead of just telling them to move up without giving them any formal training. And so, Russell, one of the things that we've talked about, and if you've paid attention to our podcast at all, Russell and I are both certified youth pastor coaches. And so we want to start doing more of that as well. And we're looking at potentially for season 3, starting some youth ministry cohort kind of things to where we meet maybe once or twice a month on Zoom, and we talk through ministry and we talk through different things, and we use our experience as youth pastors, but also our knowledge and our training as coaches to kind of help you walk through the struggles that you're dealing with. And ultimately we hope to grow that more and more. We actually both went through the same youth pastor coaching certification, and that was done through actually 2 of our previous guests, because we've had both of them on now. And it was Marco and Brian Williams. And so with that being said, it was something that was really, really impactful. And we wanted to start using that as a opportunity to reach out to youth pastors that might need that little bit of community, that little bit of coaching, and just a little bit of opportunity to have that resource to grow and develop themselves as a leader as well. Mm-hmm. And so that is something we're looking at starting for season 3, on top of the continuing episodes, of course. But we really, really want to utilize that opportunity to bring this into more of a community effort instead of a, hey, here's all this information. We want to help you learn how to apply it as well.
Yeah, I think that's huge. I mean, we talk so much in I think sometimes we give the cool side of ministry, like, man, this is the great stuff that's happening in church, and this is, you know, you get to do fun things and you get to do challenging things and you get to see students come to Jesus, and that's huge. But I think sometimes we fail, or at least in my conversations with especially newer youth pastors, is we don't do a great job talking about the business side of ministry. You know, how to conduct yourself in a business meeting, how to pitch a budget at the end of the year when it comes to the new year, because there's so many that get to the end of their first year and they're like, what? I have to, like, I know I'm supposed to budget, but I don't know how to do that. Like,
what's a receipt?
Right. Yeah. Wait, I have to actually keep receipts. Like, what are you talking about? Like, and it can be really daunting. And then even going into like a leadership meeting, sometimes a youth pastor, at least one thing that I see a lot of times is you take on a church that's so desperate for a youth pastor, and so they almost sell themselves as a church, like, okay, these are all the great things that we have going on, but we don't want you to know any of the negative stuff. And so you get there and you're like, it's almost like a 180, and you're just like, I feel lied to. Like, and I think that's another reason why a lot of youth pastors end up leaving. And I would say pastors in general, they sell the church on all the great things and the vision and where they want to go, but they don't really tell you about the darker side. Like, you know, here's some of the things that we struggle with, and here's some of the negative things about our church. And so you're almost uninformed going into it. And so then they're like, man, how do I handle a leadership meeting when, you know, half the leaders are really, really upset and like threatening to leave? You know, that's huge. Learning how to navigate through some of those things. And so,
yeah. And I think we all, as youth pastors that at least have been in for a little bit, we all have a responsibility to be equipping the ones in our area. Because the thing is we have new youth pastors coming into our communities on a regular basis. And the thing is we can be the first line of defense against burnout. We can show them ropes. We can be there to talk with them and talk the messy side of shop too. I gonna say this real quick, and then I'm gonna tell Melissa's favorite episode because she chimed in the chat. But one of the things, I went to a career fair last week, which was a lot of fun. I got asked as a youth pastor to do a ministry booth for a career fair. And I had a student come up and say, you know, what's the biggest drawback of youth ministry? And I said, I was like, man, that's a great question. I really don't know. I was like, but if anything, I said, not being prepared for the job. I was like, that can be the biggest drawback of ministry, is when you are not emotionally, physically, and spiritually prepped to do the job, you are going to die in this position. It is going to overtake you. It is going to overwhelm you. You have to have those opportunities to have the places where you can vent. You have to have the opportunities for the emotional support, for the spiritual guidance. You have to have those opportunities set up and set in place. Otherwise, this job will eventually get to the point to where it's too much. And it doesn't necessarily happen. You'll have good seasons and bad seasons like we all do, but sometimes those bad seasons hit real hard, where you have so many students that are going through things that you couldn't have even possibly imagined ever having conversations about. Like, for instance, this semester, we had a kid whose dad died. Literally, he went to school, dad died while he was at school. And I had the privilege of going and being there when they told him that his dad passed away while he was at school. But at the same time, like, that is a challenge. That is an emotional toll that if you are not prepped and ready for, it can be daunting. It can be ministry ending. And so you have to allow yourself opportunities to have those resources and those outlets that you can use. And so not having that, not being equipped or not being prepared enough to do that is a big deal. And that's why we want to start these cohorts, to hopefully provide that community and provide those opportunities for that. Melissa did chime in and she said, mine was also not my favorite, which Melissa was another guest on the show. But she said, I really got into episode 7 with Cheyenne Fenty. and retaining students through college. And so I loved that episode. That one was a lot of fun. She was such a fireball, and she was so fun to talk to. But it was a really, really important aspect of it too, is this mindset of like, are we really doing our jobs efficiently if we just drop them when they graduate? Or are we still supposed to be there and support them through the college years, maybe in a different context, because obviously they're not coming to Wednesday nights or Sunday nights every single week like they did when they were in high school. But how can we efficiently still be there for the seniors that are going into college? How can we work to get them plugged into ministries on their own campuses to where they have that support system there that they had here? Which was a fantastic episode. Loved that episode. Josh said, I often lose my receipts, but thank God I never lost my salvation. Which is
Josh Lewis, everybody.
Yeah, I'm sure that's on a youth ministry shirt somewhere.
It has to be. If not, we're making one.
Yeah, maybe that's a shirt for the store. But with that being said, we are at the 1 hour time. And so we want to respect your time if you're listening to this. And so we're going to do our final giveaways. And then if you haven't reached out to us, we would love to hear from you. You can reach out on social media like you're watching right now. You can find us on all social media platforms, I believe, at Talk Student Men. All the episode today will be on YouTube and on all of the podcasting providers later today. And we can't wait to get this one out so it can be added to our list. But season 3 starts next week, which is absolutely mind-blowing. Cannot believe we're in season 3. And yeah, so we will continue cranking out the weekly episodes. And if you'd like to be a guest on our show when you're listening to this, all you have to do is reach out to us on social media or send us an email, podcast@studentministryconversations.com, and we'd love to have you on the show. And quite honestly, we've had quite a few now that have said, hey, I want to be on the show. And we're like, great, when can you record? Like, because we love having youth pastors on that are listening and just joining and being a part of the conversation. So our last 3 books, or our last 3 giveaways, I only have one of them in front of me, but Disciple Making with Girls is going to be our next one. This is by Katie Edwards. She's been in the youth ministry game for a long time. She's now involved in Download Youth Ministry, right? I believe. And so she's been hanging out with Josh and Doug, and I'm pretty sure she's on the Download Youth Ministry podcast with them. But they are awesome. Great people. I love Katie and love the resources that she's put out. And this is going to Caleb Brimage. And so Caleb will be getting Disciple Making with Girls, which we will send to you. I will reach out after this episode and get your contact information and a mailing address so we can get you that. And then finally, we have 2 more resources. We will do the Cards Christians Like resource next, and that will be going to Chris Coker. And so we'll be sending that one out to you, buddy. Glad to see that you signed up for the giveaways on here. And then finally, making sure I go through the chat and include everybody. The signed copy of
Not Brent Aiken.
Sustainable Youth Ministry goes to Brent Aiken. No, I'm just kidding. Man, I'd love to have that copy, but
not Brent, because it's going to me.
I don't think we count, unfortunately.
No, I didn't.
But with that being said, the signed copy of Sustainable Youth Ministry by Mark DeVries is going to, and I don't hold me to the signature. I'm pretty sure he said he was going to sign it, but I'm not 100% sure. But the copy of Sustainable Youth Ministry from Mark DeVries is going to Josh Lewis.
Let's go,
So
Josh.
man, we will send that to you. He's probably just like, man, I didn't even know I signed up for a thing. But we said that if you were commenting in the chat, you also get signed up for the giveaways. So we will get that copy to you as we get it. Russell, Josh did just now throw in some last topics that he would like to be on there. So we need to make sure that we get those. How to talk to parents and grandparents about the importance of church and their influence and attendance. And then also how to talk to parents and grandparents who want nothing to do with church or Jesus.
Ooh, that second
The
part's
first
good.
one I will say, go back and check out Walt Mueller's podcast episode. We
Yeah,
go into that a
Walt
little bit.
Mueller partnering with parents.
Yeah,
That was a great
touch it a little
episode.
bit, but yeah, those are definitely ones to reemphasize and go in more on. But the second part of that is like, I need to find somebody talking to that, because that's awesome to think about, but definitely something to look at.
Yeah, that's definitely we have to find the right guest for that episode because we want to make sure and do that one well. But with that being said, thank you all for watching and listening to this live. And if you are listening to this after it's been put on the podcast providers and YouTube, we want to thank you as well. We cannot do this show without you guys. We love hearing from you, whether it's, hey, I loved this episode, or hey, I want to be on the show. Be sure to reach out to us, and we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to have you on the show, and we might be doing some more panels like this in the future as some episodes. I'd love to get that going as well. But until next week on Thursday, start of season 3, we will see you guys later. You have a great week, and we hope that you have been encouraged, inspired, and we hope that you share your favorites with other youth pastors as you all do ministry together.
Yeah, y'all have a good week, and we'll see y'all next time.